I remember thinking, I had a conversation with a teacher who said the little 7-year-old said they were going camping. They were going camping. But as time went on, we realized that they were camping for a significant amount of time. But we realized that they were experiencing homelessness, and they were camping, whether it be in the car, in the tent, and they go back and forth through the hotel. A 7-year-old didn't quite understood what was going on, but they were comfortable enough so that the parent reassured them that, hey, this is a temporary setback. This is what we're experiencing, but it's not all bad. But, I'm still here for you. But the child didn't per se understand it. In some ways, that was a good thing, the way that particular parent handled that situation.
And welcome to Miracles from the Hill podcast, where we share raw stories that display the anatomy of God's grace here at Miracle Hill Ministries. If this is your first time joining us, please subscribe. And of course, you can like, comment, and leave a review. To connect with us, visit our website linked in the description box. And now, here is our host, Ryan Dirk.
Greetings, listeners, and welcome back to the Miracles from the Hill podcast. We are deep in season 3, where we're diving into the reality of children experiencing homelessness. If you'd like to, if you'd like more people to hear about this podcast, please pause the episode and leave a review on whatever platform you're listening to. You can also follow the show to make sure you're one of the first to listen to new content. I talked to a guy yesterday that was sitting on a beach listening to the podcast. He texted me and I said, that sounds terrible. Like, turn us off and put on some Bob Marley or something. What are you doing on a beach listening to a podcast? But he was. So the podcast is getting out there. If you have a question you'd like to see us address on an episode, email podcast@miraclehill.org. Man, we are blessed. On this episode, we're excited to have Irene Hamilton-Jones joining us. Good morning, Irene.
Good morning.
So Irene is the Homeless Education Liaison, McKinney-Vento Project Coordinator with Greenville County Schools. And that is a mouthful, but we will unpack it in the, as we walk through this episode. Essentially, you know what, I'm already trying to answer questions. I'm not going to do that. Okay, Irene, we're just going to go straight into you. How in the world did you get connected to social work?
Ryan, I'm going to tell you right off the cuff, I am not a social worker. And I tell my boss that all the time. In fact, that's the running joke. And he says to me that, Irene, you're probably more of a social worker than some of the social workers that we have in the building. So I take that as a compliment for sure, but I am in the social work department within Greenville County Schools, but I am not a social worker, but I started out straight out of college for more or less. I began working with at-risk teenage juveniles, boys, with the Greenville Group Home, and from there I went into communities and schools, working with them within the school system, doing counseling, and that led me into parents as teachers, working with single parents in shelters, and from there the rest is history. I've been working with shelters ever since.
And so why did you feel this call? So you're not a social worker, but you're doing all this social work on behalf of people who are struggling. Why are you passionate about it?
That's a good question. I thought about that, and the thing that leads me is the fact that somebody invested in me. Somebody poured into me. And I realized the value of having a strong support system. I have wonderful parents, family. I lost my mother when I was 21 years of age. So I lost her when I needed her the most, when I was at the prime of my life, per se. But it was that continued support of having my sister, my brother, my father, and other family support, other individuals who thought enough of me to invest in me, to contribute to me. And I realized then it's not so much where you come from, but those who take the time to pour into you. So I wanted to be that person, to be able to speak some wonderful words of encouragement to someone out there, for them to know that, regardless of what you're going through right now, that's not who you are. And there's so much more to life.
So you experienced not being alone, and you wanted to help people to have the same experience.
Very much so.
So we're going to get into what your day looks like and what your job is, but when the day gets really long and hard and you can't make anything happen that you need to happen, what keeps you going?
The love of my family, realizing that I get to go home and cry on someone else's shoulders after listening and having others cry on mine.
Amen. So on this podcast, we've talked many, many times about what it means to experience homelessness. And we've talked about how, depending on who you are or where you are or what organization you represent, that people define that very differently. And so you are the liaison for Greenville County Schools. How does Greenville County Schools define homelessness? Or maybe the better question is, how does McKinney-Vento define homelessness?
So Greenville County Schools follow the McKinney-Vento Homeless Education Act, which is a federal act designed to ensure that all students have equitable, fair access to education across the board. McKinney-Vento Homeless Education Act simply states that it's anyone who lacks a fixed, regular, or adequate nighttime residence. So these are families, students, children who find themselves displaced for one reason or another, living in various locations, situations, whether it be in a hotel, a shelter, or living with other relatives temporarily. We call that, for lack of a better word, doubled up. Of course, some individuals would argue and state that, well, if you're doubled up, you're probably not homeless, but I beg to differ. I used to be a foster care licensing facilitator, so I did trainings with foster care, and I used to work with my sister quite often in doing those trainings. And we had this wonderful saying, I'm sure you guys have heard, and if you haven't, you'll hear it again, because we have this wonderful saying that we always say, come to see is not like come to stay. And it's very true, because when you have someone to visit you for a short period of time, after a while, it can become burden, time constrained. And I've had families, when I do trainings, I tell people all the time, I say, I love my son tremendously. He is 35 years old. Well, 35, Lord have mercy. 32 years of age now. 32 years of age now, doing his own thing, and I'm so proud of him for sure. When he comes home and visit, I'm excited. And I just got off the phone with him just a few minutes ago, and I told him, I can't wait to see you because I haven't seen you in a while. But as quickly as I say that, and I know he comes home and he spends maybe about 3 or 4 days, by the 5th day, the 7th, it's about time for him to get ready to go home. I was like, you know what? I love you, but I'm sure it's time for you to go home. And I say that jokingly, but the truth of the matter is, so many of the families that I work with, they're hurting and they're visiting and they're staying with other individuals. But around that 7th day, they're wearing out their stay. The families are beginning to feel like they are imposing on the person they're staying with. And the families that are putting them up are beginning to feel like, how long is this welcome mat going to be open? Yeah. So, families want to be helpful. They want to give back. What do we do? So, McKinney says that anyone who are doubled up and don't have any place else to go, and it's not a choice, because we get that confused too. McKinney states that you're where you are because you have no other options. You didn't choose to be here. Maybe something happened through no fault of your own, a catastrophic event. It could have been a hurricane or tornado or something to destroy your home. You could have lost your job, and therefore you can no longer afford the rent and things of that nature. And as a result of that, now you're no longer in the place that you can afford to stay where you once were staying, and therefore you've lost your residence.
You know, the details are the important piece, right? So adequate. What is an adequate nighttime residency? So a couch is great.
But is it adequate?
It's not a bed.
I beg to differ. You're
right?
It's not
and you're not guaranteed to stay there. That which gets to the fixed piece, right? Like you're doubled up on somebody's couch. That is not your couch.
That is not your couch.
That's somebody else's couch. And the motels are a good example of something that's not fixed,
It's
right?
not fixed.
There's no guarantee that you're going to be there from week to week. We're going to get into more depth on the hotels a little bit later on. Let me ask a clarifying question. Would someone in foster care be considered homeless under the Act?
Ryan, that is a loaded question because an individual who has been removed from their home by DSS and placed into foster care would not fall under McKinney-Vento Homeless Education Act, but probably could fall under Fostering Connections Act, which is similar but not quite the same. However, if DSS removes a student and places that individual with relatives under kinship care, they potentially could fall under McKinney-Vento. So you have to look at it differently. And the reason for that is with kinship care, if DSS didn't bring them into their umbrella, then they are not DSS. DSS placed them with a relative. So because of that, they potentially could be considered McKinney-Vento.
Any way you shake it, it's still not good.
Any way you shake it, it's still not good.
Right? Kinship's probably better than anything else, but it's still not good. Okay, so let's try to set our listeners up to understand the landscape. How many total students are in Greenville County Schools, roughly?
We have roughly 77,000 students in Greenville County Schools, and out of that number, approximately 1% have been identified as experiencing homelessness, which is a lot. It truly is, but it's nowhere near where it should be. We should be around 2.5%, and we may even break that by the end of this school year per se. But we have. At the end of the school year last year, I believe we identified about 1,300 students. That's a lot of students.
Which is 20% up from the year before.
Exactly.
And then how much do you expect it to go up when you count for this year?
I wouldn't. I anticipate that we'll probably hit about 1,500 this year.
So another 15% or so. And so you're saying the national average is like 2.5%?
The national average is 2.5%.
Really?
Really.
Wow. So I just want to rest on that for a minute. So if you are a student experiencing homelessness, the last thing you're worried about is getting an education.
Very much so.
Right? Like you're worried about where you're going to sleep, what you're going to eat, whether or not you're gonna, have somewhere to go after school, which is a real challenge. Okay, so a little over 1%, but so arguably Greenville County is doing pretty good.
Are we?
Compared to 2.5%.
So Greenville County is doing pretty good, all things considering. If we are truly identifying all of the students that are out there. And I'm thinking we're still missing numbers. We're still missing individuals as far as truly identifying them. And I say that because some parents, for reasons, and I completely get it, are reluctant to share.
Sure.
It could be embarrassment. It could be fear.
Fear of losing your kids.
Of course.
Yeah.
So you have to take that in consideration. We are not DSS, and I tell them that all the time. We're not in the job of trying to take your kids. We want to do what's in the best interest of you and your children, for your children, so that they can obtain the education they so richly deserve. We want to make sure they get that.
Okay, so we know some of the general statistics about people who experience homelessness and overrepresentation by some populations, but let's drill down to students. So like in your work, are there groups, ethnicities, demographics that are more expressly represented by the student population experiencing homelessness?
So I found that homelessness crosses all sector, education, ethnicity, occupation, ages, but it is disproportionately more in people of color. It's found more in people of color.
So the general average is like 300% representation. So like in America, 42% of those experiencing homelessness are African American, which is 300% of the population average. So is it that high for the students as well? Is it just reflective of the general population?
It is reflective of the general population.
Okay. Which, man, we could go down a whole rabbit hole about why that exists, but we'll leave it alone for now. So how does the experience of homelessness become a barrier to effective learning for a student, and how do you see that expressed in the students?
Well, it's a variety of things. Children are resilient, and parents who take the time to really talk with their kids, or in some cases shield them, they, I don't want to say train them, but they coach them so much so that the things that they are experiencing, in some cases, depending on the age of the child, can be perceived as a fun game. I remember thinking, I had a conversation with a teacher who said the little 7-year-old said they were going camping. They were going camping. But as time went on, we realized that they were camping for a significant amount of time. But we realized that they were experiencing homelessness, and they were camping, whether it be in the car, in the tent, and they go back and forth through the hotel. A 7-year-old didn't quite understood what was going on, but they were comfortable enough so that the parent reassured them that, hey, this is a temporary setback. This is what we're experiencing, but it's not all bad. But, I'm still here for you. But the child didn't per se understand it. In some ways, that was a good thing, the way that particular parent handled that situation, because that child was still able to come to school and interact with other students and engage until, of course, it led to other things where the parent can no longer keep it afloat. And it began to affect the student in that way. Some students are able to hide it, especially middle schoolers. They become non-interested. They don't communicate with others. They don't engage in conversations. Sometimes they become argumentative because you don't understand what they're going through. And maybe a teacher may be asking for a homework assignment, not understanding what it is that the student is dealing with. Or maybe they were asking the student to answer a particular question, not realizing the student really didn't have time to read or to study or to follow up on whatever it is that you're asking. So the student doesn't have an answer to the question, so they, rather than answering the question, they become argumentative and maybe find ways to take the pressure off of them by cracking a joke or making a funny remark or something like that, to change the context of the conversation piece, just to put it in a direction where they can respond, where they're a little bit more comfortable. If you have high schoolers, they may just not come to school that day because they don't want to engage and they don't want to be embarrassed. Maybe I had a teenager, I think the parent was unable to get the child's hair fixed, and she was embarrassed about going to school. She didn't want to go to, no one could understand that. But for a teenager, that's a big deal, especially a female. You're getting your hair done, you're going to school, and you can't get your hair done. You don't want kids to make fun of you and things of that nature. And sometimes as adults, we don't take that into consideration. But it's vitally important, because if you want me to be able to listen to you, to take in what you're teaching me, whatever the lesson is for the day, I have to be comfortable in my own skin. I have to be at peace. I have to be able to relate, to be able to take a pause to understand what it is that you're sharing with me. And if I feel like I don't fit in, that I'm standing out because my hair doesn't look right, or I don't have on appropriate clothing or things of that nature, the last thing I want to hear is anything that you have to say to me.
Right. You don't want to learn about, the War of 1812 when you're worried about whether or not, you're getting mocked for who you are as a human being.
Exactly.
So let's talk about some of the basic resources that are often lacking when a student is experiencing homelessness. Like, what are the big ticket items?
The big ticket items, other than having a roof over their head and affordable housing, of course, clothing, having access to clothing, or being able to wash them appropriately, continuously, upkeep, basic needs, hair, haircuts, things of that nature, getting to school. Of course, the school district provides transportation, and we do our due diligence to try to make sure we can get them there. But when they are moving from house A to B to C within 2 to 3 weeks, as soon as transportation is set up, sometimes they have to move again. So we have to start that process all over again. So we're talking about another 3 to 5 days that the kid is once again missing. Granted, it can be excused, but excusing it really doesn't help them get the instruction on time that they're missing. So we have to take that in consideration as well. Other things they're missing, other than the academic, access to probably proper nutrition that plays a part in them, especially if you're in a motel. And that's extremely challenging. If you happen to be in a motel with a kitchenette, it makes it a little bit easier, but most families are in just in a hotel room with 2 double beds with a microwave. So of course the things that you're having in there are things that you can heat up for quickness.
Lots of burritos,
takeouts, raviolis, they come in handy, cereal, things of that nature.
So with these kids that are dealing with all these things, how is that contributing to their personal development or their emotional, their mental development?
Yeah, students, it goes back to the individual. There is no one answer fit all when it comes to students like that, because it depends on that person. Are they strong? Are they resilient? What are they meeting up against when they walk through the doors of the classroom? Is there a teacher there that's investing in that particular individual to help them, realizing that this is just one little stepping stone that we have to overcome, but I'm here to help you. We have some remarkable teachers in the district, and I've heard stories of teachers going above and beyond, making sure they had snacks in their classroom to help the students when they come in there. In some cases, they pull them aside to give them just a little bit more instruction so that they can feel that they are accomplishing something, so that they feel that, I am worth something. I am a worthy, valuable person, and someone cares enough for me so that I can put forth my best effort to try to make a difference. I can put forth my best effort to at least try to obtain this particular grade for this teacher. I get calls all the time from teachers, principals who have students that they're working with, that sometimes they go above and beyond the call of duty and will pick up a student and bring the student to school if they can. We don't necessarily advise that. You do have to be careful with certain things, but they will do that to try to help the student, making sure that, I don't have any kids. I've heard one teacher say, I don't have any kids, but this student is such a likable young man, and he is going above and beyond doing what we ask for him. He's just wanting someone to be able to help him. So I want to help him as much as I can. We get stories like that all the time.
So let me ask one more follow-up on the transportation. So if the student is in school A, but they get displaced and they're over in the motel, which is around school B, for 2 weeks, and then they're in another motel that's around school C for 2 weeks. Does Greenville County try to keep them in school A, or are they moving them from school to school?
I take the families that I work with very seriously, and I look at each one of them as if they were my child. And I ask myself, what would I want for my son if this student was my son or daughter? I only have one child per se, but
32, not 35.
That's right, not 35. One child, and then of course I have 2 by marriage, but that's a joke. Right, but I often say I'm going to do everything I can to keep them in the school where they are, because you've already have a stable environment where you began. So this school year, this is 22-23. We began the year in school A. I want them to finish this school year at least in school A, because these are the friends that they know. These are the teachers they know. Now, granted, sometimes it does work in the student's best interest to go ahead and change, because maybe they need a new environment.
Sure.
And they're welcome to that if that is something they want. Some parents will elect to go ahead and change them from school A to school B. I don't advise that. School A to school B to school C. I don't advise that, because every time you change school, you're falling behind.
Sure.
And you may think that I'm closer, so of course I'm getting them to school and they have access to transportation immediately, and that's true. But the problem with that is school A and school B and school C are not on the identical path.
Right.
So just because you were doing this in school A, you get to school C, they may have already covered what you need to cover, so you're going to miss out on that. But had you stayed where you are, you would be still on target. So that's what I do. But ultimately, it's the parents' decision.
Yeah.
And they get to decide what it is they want. I give them the information, and sometimes I don't even agree with the schools. I mean, and that's my job. I'm a very unbiased person. I work for the school system, but it's my job to make sure that we're doing what's in the best interest of the student. The schools may not always like that, but at the end of the day, they know that we're going to do what's in the best interest for the student.
Yeah, I don't know that I've ever thought about that transition. We're talking about people experiencing homelessness, but I would guess that if any student changes schools, that becomes a struggle for them, right? Like they have to figure out a new curriculum, new teachers, new school layout. Everything could create a little bit of a trauma, even in the healthiest of homes, right? Now you're adding trauma to trauma by pulling them from school to school to school, and they're experiencing homelessness.
Trauma to trauma. Very well stated. Because like you said, we all have a little bit of trauma here and there, when even in the healthiest. But of course, when you don't have a normal environment, who is it that can define what normalcy is per se? I mean, what is normal for you may not be normal for me, but in the grand scheme of things, what is considered a healthy, everyday average American family per se, a lot of these kids don't have that. So if their home is in a hotel, if they're in a hotel living with 3 other siblings and a mom, or maybe 2 siblings, a mom and a dad in one room. Can you imagine being in one room?
One room, not too much bigger than the one we're in now, which is not big.
That's exactly right. One room. Even on vacations, I thought about when I was a little girl going on vacations with my family. That was the most fun I enjoyed. Being in a hotel with them, sharing that room. But I was glad when I got back home and had my own room. Yeah. And a lot of these families, they don't get to do that. So can you imagine trying to do your homework with 4 other people in a one room, and the TV's running and the kids are making noise in the background?
Listen, my wife and I, we have made a decision the past couple years. We would rather have, like when we plan our beach trip, we'd rather have a house further away from the beach with the extra bedroom to get the kids out of our bedroom than dead up on the beach with the kids in the same room because you can't relax.
You cannot relax. Exactly. That is so true. You can't. So how can we expect the students to relax?
How do we expect them to do it? If for every day, right?
Every
and they've got
day.
nowhere to go outside
And
because
they
they're at the motels and it's not safe. Yeah. You're just setting somebody up for, they're probably not resting well.
They're not resting well. And sometimes they come to school sleepy and tired, falling asleep in the classroom. And you know what bothers me the most probably is when that happens and then a teacher requests a meeting with the parent, as they should. So I do get it and understand. But then I'm like, we need to look a little bit further and see what's going on in this environment. Because you request the meeting to get the parent to come, and you hope to get the parent to come, and maybe the parent can't come, and now the teachers are upset because the parent doesn't show up for the meeting. But did they take the time to realize maybe the parent didn't show up for the meeting because mom has to work?
Yeah.
She can't afford to miss another day out of her job to make ends meet, to pay for that hotel bill. The one that's lacking the proper space, but it is providing shelter for them temporarily.
We all have a tendency to lay judgment on people because of their actions when we don't know their story.
We don't know their story.
Right? And I'm feeling guilty right this second about like all the kids that used to fall asleep in class that we would judge, or had behavioral issues that we would judge. We didn't know what their story was.
You didn't know what their story was. And I'll be quite honest with you. Before I did this job, I've been doing this probably about 20 years now, but before I did this, for the life of me, I could not understand how could someone truly be homeless? I mean, you know, I see them every day. They're not on the street, so how can they be homeless? But it wasn't until I truly dive into it and got into it, and I realized, you know, homelessness affects all of us. It is not just the people who are truly experiencing it, but I realized not to pass judgment. You have to have an open mind to be able to understand what it is that they're going to. They're hurting. We have so many people that are hurting, and they're doing the best they can with what they have.
Amen to that. Okay, so do we see higher levels of substance abuse, mental health, disciplinary issues, other things like that in the student population experiencing homelessness?
Unfortunately, yes. As a student gets older, we see an increase in behavior issues, and probably because now they can speak up for themselves. You know, they can fight back. So they become, like I said, a little bit more argumentative, combative with teachers, with other students, especially someone's making fun of them. It's human nature. We're going to defend ourselves, and we don't want anyone picking on us, looking down on us, but it happens. And sometimes if you're the outside looking in, and I say that we can be judgmental by doing that. So if you have a teacher who's seeing the student arguing with another student, so they see the student that's displaced, but they don't understand why this displaced student is arguing with this student. But this is the student that's getting suspended. We have to suspend both of them. We can't just leave one of them. But they don't understand, well, why did that happen? Why didn't he just come talk to me? Maybe he tried and you didn't open your ears.
What about, Irene, what about runaway? Do we see more runaway?
Oh, my gosh. Yeah.
Trying to avoid or trying to escape their own situation?
Yeah. There's been an increase in that influx. You know, people get to make decisions for whatever reason on their own, and we have to support whatever they do. So I'm not in the business to judge them. I may not agree with their lifestyle, the choices they make for one reason or another. But people, as a result, more families are asking teenagers to leave the home, whether it's because, I don't know, maybe the student got pregnant or lifestyle or whatever the case may be. Again, I don't know. And they can't fit in. So they run away. They're all over the place per se. And some of them leave because they don't have what it takes. Maybe in some cases, some teenagers are doing better than some of the parents. And they're running away to get away from them to try to help defend for themselves. So we see that as well. Have a couple that's getting ready to graduate. I'm so proud of them and all that they've overcame over the years and where they are. But, it does happen, unfortunately, and there's been an increase in that direction as well. We have to be careful because sometimes when students, high schoolers, particularly 10th grade and above, they're leaving to get away from a situation. Maybe the parent can no longer feed them or provide them with the proper amount of food. And parents become argumentative because they're at their wits' end and they're just like, I can't do this anymore, kind of a thing. And so they leave and go with another family friend or whatever, someone else take them in. Or maybe they just run away from that to get away from the drugs or the alcohol or whatever that's in their environment. I haven't met a parent, and I can honestly say this, I have not met a parent who wants the best for their children. Do they understand the ability to go about providing that? Might be a little different, but all parents want the best for their child. But while they're going through it, it's hard for them to put a grasp to understand it exactly what it is that I'm doing and how it's affecting my child. Why is it that my child feels like they don't need to be here and they need to leave?
Well, the parent might be in survival mode too, right? And so they can't see their child in survival mode. I think it's important to point out, like, we're in this country, we're experiencing now multi-generational poverty. But we can't use that is going to be true for every person in that situation. Like, some of these students will turn and go in the opposite direction and be very successful, right? Like, this it's not a perfect predictor of them not being successful. They can say, hey, I saw this growing up, and so I'm going to do the opposite. And there's all kinds of stories where kids escape on their own and become very successful in life.
Very much so. I was just at a meeting just the other day with On Track Greenville, and they were telling me about one of their success stories with a student who's in college now at Clemson, doing well. She has so much to overcome within her family unit, but she did it. She strived with the help and guidance of On Track and other individuals within the school system. And now, like I say, she's studying at Clemson, doing remarkably well.
Yeah, we just got a letter in the mail from a student who was in one of our group homes years ago. And the letter essentially said, hey, I just wanted to thank Miracle Hill for what they did. And it was an invitation to his graduation party. Right, like he escaped.
He escaped.
Right, he's going in the opposite direction.
He overcame the odds.
He overcame the odds, or is overcoming the odds. Okay, so talk about the idea that school is a source of stability, affirmation, and hope.
Oh, school is exactly that. That's exactly what it is for our students because, at least when they're at school, they're safe. They're in a stable environment. They're with people who care about them, people that are investing in them, people who are reassuring them, letting them know that they are special, unique individuals who have so much to give and to contribute. School is doing exactly what it was designed to do. In addition to providing education, it builds hope. It fosters hope within an individual. And I've seen that so many times, time and time again. And it does my heart good when someone will walk up to me out of nowhere and they say, Miss Hamilton Jones, and I said, yes. And they said, you probably don't know me or you probably don't remember me. And I'm like, I probably don't because I'm awful with names anyway. But she said, I just want to let you know that I really appreciate you helping me. You put me in touch with someone who was able to help me find housing. And as a result of that, I'm working now. They helped me get a job. I'm working. My kids are in school. I have my own place. I just want to say thank you. And I'm like, oh, that does me so much hope. That gives me so much hope. And I'm so thankful that you took the time to share that with me. Because that's our job. We focus on education, but we do realize that education is just a small component, and that students cannot be successful without our partners. So I depend on the partners to help me invest into these families, invest into these students. While the staff is there pouring into the student, our partners are pouring into their parents, helping them take that next step to get the job or maintain the job. I'm so grateful and thankful for organizations like Miracle Hill and Share and United Housing Connections. I don't know what I would do without United Housing Connections. I get so many calls of families looking for affordable housing and can't get it because they have an eviction on their record. And it stays there for a while, and it makes it difficult to get the next housing. And people say, well, an eviction, but what they fail to realize is that, it takes 7 years to overcome that eviction. Once it's there,
Scarlet letter, doesn't go anywhere.
It doesn't go anywhere, and it's hard for the families to move. So United Housing will grab that family by the hand and kind of walk them through the process. And in some cases, do a sublease where they're actually leasing the apartment for them to help them get on their feet until they can, maintain or handle the apartment themselves or the lease themselves. And so often I get calls about families looking for housing, and I don't know what I would do without my partners. They help me help the families who are investing in the students so that they can take that next step forward.
My understanding is that South Carolina has some of the most pro-eviction legislation in the nation, maybe the most pro-eviction, easiest to evict somebody in the nation.
And isn't that sad? That is so very sad that we are even having to discuss that. And what's even more challenging is, I understand, it's a business. You have to make money. Companies out there making money. I get that. I truly do get that. But why is it that you have someone in an apartment, you give them a lease, they have it, and then when the lease expires, you more than double, sometimes triple the rent?
Yeah.
I mean, that makes life so difficult. I was talking with a family just the other day, and fortunately, she is the type of family that has the ability to be able to move to find something else. But so many of our families do not have that opportunity, that ability to move and find something else. This family was working, and I think she was paying like $1,100 for rent, and her rent just went from $1,100 to $1,500. But they didn't make any changes.
Yeah.
But like I said, she was able to move. She and her husband moved and was able to get another apartment. But a lot of our families, they can't do that.
Yep.
Not at all. And when that happens, you know where they're moving to? Not another apartment. They're moving to a hotel.
Yeah, and to make it even more complicated, so they can find that rent outside or further out away from the city center that they're used to, where it's a food desert and there's no transportation and there's no services. And so to get the rent they need, they have to go away from everything else that they need in order to make their life work. It's a impossible situation for most of them. So let's go back to the very beginning. What is the McKinney-Vento Act?
So, the McKinney-Vento Act simply states anyone who lacks a fixed, regular, adequate nighttime residence. Fixed meaning it stays, it does not move. You can come and go free will on your own, meaning you have your own key. You don't have to get permission to ask, is it okay for me to stay here while you're not here? This is my home. It's regular, it's adequate, meaning there are no holes in the floor. The windows are properly sealed. Fixed, regular, adequate, nighttime resident. It stays. It's going to be there when I get home, and I know I can open in and I can walk in. I have a place to lay my head. So
where did it come from?
So it was established in 1987 by a gentleman. His name was Stuart McKinney.
Okay.
Stuart McKinney and Bruce Vento.
Okay.
They collaborated together. Thus, you had the McKinney-Vento
Okay.
Homeless Education Act. And it was signed into law in 1987 by then President Ronald Reagan and reauthorized in 2002 by Bill Clinton.
Why did it need to be reauthorized?
Well, because it needed, Congress was having a disagreement. They, of course,
Say it ain't
Congress,
so.
say it ain't
Congress
so.
disagreed about something, Irene?
I
You
just
tell me.
declare. Go figure. But at any rate, Bill Clinton put it under Title 10, which is Education Act designed to make sure that all students who are experiencing displaced or a lack of housing would have access to free, equitable education. They realized that students were having difficulties getting into school because they lacked the basic documentation.
Sure.
The little petty things that we thrive ourselves and you say you have to have before you can get into a school. So the law was designed to say, well, if you're displaced, it's okay if you don't have those things. That's not a reason for the student not to be in school. So we are going to make it so that you can enroll immediately, have that student to enroll in school immediately.
So I recently had the DMV reach out to me and tell me that I owed them some documentation and some money. Okay. And it's a long story. I won't get into the long story. But took me about 2 weeks, 1,000 phone calls, a trip to Charlotte. It took a lot, but I got it handled. Okay. And so here was one of my takeaways. I have every resource imaginable. Money in the bank, a vehicle. My wife was a bloodhound on the phone for me. And it was a 2-week nightmare to get that situation handled, right? What about the people that don't have all those resources, right? Like we see them every day at Miracle Hill, but if a school says to a parent, we need records of your immunizations.
And they will say that.
And they'll say that. And if you got resources, you can take some time off, go down to whatever pediatrician that you've been to, get the printed record, take it to the school. Man, but what happens when you don't have transportation? You work a job that you can't take time off, like you're stuck.
You're stuck. So, Ryan, that's where I come in the picture.
Yep.
So, as a McKinney-Vento liaison, my job is to address policies within the district. It is my job to remove whatever barriers put in place against families who are suffering, who are displaced, who are unhoused, looking for guidance. And to give those guidance to the staff personnel within the Greenville County School District. So I give them instructions like, yes, we have policy and procedures across the board when it comes to any student. But if this student is experiencing homelessness and displaced, it is our job to go ahead and complete McKinney-Vento forms, which we have, allow the families to complete that, and we'll go ahead and pull them in. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't have to provide the documentation. You do still have to provide the documentation. You just don't have to provide it at the initial beginning. It's not going to delay the enrollment into the school for the child. We have social workers who will then get with the families and make sure the families get whatever they need for the student to maintain them to be enrolled in the school where they are.
So you're the grease on all the squeaky wheels.
I'm the grease on all the squeaky wheels. So if they have a complaint, they can call me and say, this school is not doing it. It's my job to make sure that I remove those barriers.
Yeah, so almost like law enforcement. You're the sheriff. You
don't
tell them what's going on.
Well, I will educate them for sure. I will educate them for sure. I don't want to say I'm law enforcement because I like to think the district is doing what they are supposed to do. I take pride in educating them and getting the word out there so they know what to do. But in the event that something does happen, or maybe they just had a temporary memory lapse, who knows, Sometimes, we're all overwhelmed we have
Sure.
so much going on and we can forget. I mean, that's only understandable. And when that happens, if they just give me a call, I'll gladly point them in the right direction and say, this is all you need to do with this particular family. And sometimes, I have to be fair. I do have to be fair because, unfortunately, Ryan, we've come to realize that the law is designed to help those who need it. And there are lots of people who need it and benefit from that. But we also realize that those are individuals who will try to take advantage of the law as well. So we have to weed those individuals out as well. Taking that into consideration, that's when it's important for the social workers to interact with the families to see exactly what the family situation is, to try to help them. We want the kids to go to school. We want them to go to school now. So often kids are not in school. You're talking about you had every means possible to overcome the issue that you were dealing with. But if you have a family who doesn't have that and the kids are going to be out of school for a week or 2 weeks, I want to tell the parent, pick up the phone and give me a call. Even if I'm not the person that can help you, I will put you in touch with the person who can help you.
Sure.
Because your situation may not be a McKinney situation, but I might can direct you into the person to help you get your child back in school. There's no reason for a kid to be out of school for a week or more. And we've seen it. And for me, it is unacceptable completely.
So, what rights do the students have?
So they have the right to be enrolled immediately in school once they've been identified, whether they have documentation or not. We will work with them, like I say, to obtain the necessary documentation. They have a right to attend the school for which they are currently zoned. Now that's important, and I want to stress that because it is important to understand if a student becomes homeless and they were zoned for school A, and then they move and went to school B, they still have the right to maintain enrollment in school A if they desire for the remainder of that current academic year. However, the following year, unless the student is a rising senior, in which cases we certainly will grant them the right to finish out if they've been there 2 or more years, but they should enroll in the school where they're currently being zoned for the upcoming year. They also have the right, if they so choose, that they decided that they want to change schools. Because, for one reason or another, disputes will take place or occur. And if a parent decides that they want to enroll their child in school B because now they're in attendance zone B, they have that right if they so wish. That it's not always in the best interest, but the parent, if they so elect to want to do that, they can do that. The student has a right to free lunch and breakfast. We give that automatically. And they have a right to tutoring services if need be. Parents have to request it. But the good thing about Greenville County School District, almost every single school provides tutoring services, whether you're McKinney or not. So the services are already there. You just need to take advantage of it.
So you talked about the lunches. What are other resources and programs that are available to these students?
They also have a right to transportation, obviously, going back and forth to school. We put them in touch with various partners for their parents to help them looking into whatever resources that the family. We have to look at it as a case-by-case situation because there is no identical. I've been doing this 20 years. I've yet to have one remotely identical situations that I've dealt with. They may be similar. So we look at each individual family unit to see what all that we can give. We can provide assistance for field trips for students if need be. McKinney-Vento grant. We have the McKinney-Vento grant. You have to apply for that, and that is a competitive grant. Greenville County has been very successful in obtaining that the last 6+ years. It comes in increments of every 3 years. So I guess we've had it 4 times. So probably about 12 years total. Mm-hmm. I'm very proud of that, to say the least. But that grant allows us to invest in our students, whether they need supplies, clothing, uniforms, things of that nature. Unfortunately, it does not allow us to pay for housing assistance, so we can't pay rent or utilities or anything like that. And it does not allow us to use those funds for the major big field trips, like the theme parks and things of that nature. They will not allow us to use funds like that. But anything else, anything that's educationally related to help with band fees, school fees, we address and take care of things like that for the students.
So not to paint, as we're drawing to a close here, not to paint this really negative picture, but what keeps you up at night? What's the hardest part of your job?
The hardest part of my job is not having enough resources for my students. Sometimes the food pantries get low. We give food boxes. We gave out 325 food boxes to students. That's just the students this year alone. So things of that nature. It's just not having enough resources. I mean, Greenville is a very resourceful town, and they give in leaps and bounds. They truly do, and I'm so appreciative of everything that we've been able to receive over the years. But in saying that, the numbers continue to grow, the need continues to grow. So the need is out there.
Mm-hmm. So we have great, amazing listeners. So there's somebody out there right now who's thinking to themselves, man, I want to help Irene. How can our listeners help you help those students experiencing homelessness?
Honestly, I would probably say if you truly wanted to help me, my families need affordable housing. How do we get that? Well, I need you to work with my partners. My partners are people like Share or like United Housing Connection. United Housing Connection has probably helped me put approximately maybe about 20 families in affordable housing that I've personally worked with. If we can get 20 more of that, that would be wonderful. So yeah, you want to help me, help those, so we can help work together as a team to continue to help the families find affordable housing.
So, all these worlds kind of overlap, right? So right now, as we're talking, there's probably, making up a number, there's probably 15 mothers with children across Miracle Hill in our shelters across the counties. These are kids that are growing up in a shelter and still trying to go to school. We've got, 150 or so children in foster care situations, which may not fit under McKinney-Vento, but they are displaced and traumatized in the midst of their experience. We have 120 men and women in our recovery programs right now. I'm making up a number. Let's say 70% of them are separated from their children. There's no telling where their children are, right? They could be with another parent. They could be with grandparents, which is all too often the case. But man, it is so reassuring to know that you're there doing what you're doing every day to make the experience of the kids just a little bit easier as they are trying to be a kid, right? Like, man, that's where my heart's at. Like, how can we help these kids to continue to be kids and not grow up when they're 11 years old because they have to?
Because they have to.
Right? And so thank you for what you're doing. Thank you to the county for what it's doing on behalf of now 1,300 children.
13.
And that is a shocking number. I've used the 1,100 number on here many times before. 1,300 is new. Anything else you want to add before we close?
No, I think the one thing I want to impress upon your listeners out there is that these students are, like you said, they're well over 1,300 students in the Greenville County system all over Greenville County who are experiencing homelessness for one reason or another. And they're looking for individuals to pour into them, to give to them, to help them. I want to go on record and say I am greatly appreciative, again, to all my partners, but especially to Miracle Hill. I know Lake Forest Elementary School is one of the schools that have lots of students for sure who have a very large number of students who have been identified as experiencing homelessness. And but they're also the school that feed into Shepherd's Gate, one of the shelters that we depend on.
Yeah.
But I have a success story with that as well, and I'm going to say that, and I guess I'll end on that as well, because we had a family, and I can't think of her name, and that's really irrelevant at this point in time, but it was a mother and a daughter, and they started out, they were at Shepherd's Gate for about 2 to 3 months, maybe even 4 months. And I got a call from Northwood just the other day, and they shared with me that the family finally was able to move out of the shelter into front porch housing.
Yeah.
Now, that's just a stepping stone, but
Sure.
that's for those who don't understand or get it, that's a remarkable, promising step that I can't even begin. It does my heart good because that parent stayed the course. So often you want to give up and you quit. But she stayed the course and she was able to make it, and now they're over there. And she was so excited to be able to move into a place that it's just her and her
Sure.
family. It's just her and her daughter. That's theirs. It is now fixed. It is now regular. It is now adequate. I'm just thrilled and elated. And hopefully from there, she will move into her own permanent
Sure.
housing. And that's what we want.
Right.
But we need more of that. So I say to you, thank you all for the job that you're doing. Again, I could not accomplish anything without my partners. So I'm grateful and appreciative for it all.
Irene, I say it all the time, I got the best job in the world, right? I get to sit around and watch God at work, watch people's lives change, same as you do, right? Like that story is what keeps you going, same as what keeps me going, right? Like that is the light that we see so often. Well, let me close this in prayer and we'll go back to our day.
All right.
Oh, Lord, we love you. We thank you for today. Father, I don't think any of us will go throughout the rest of the day without thinking about those 1,300 kids, Lord. These are 1,300 souls, people that you have every hair on their head counted. And behind every one of those 1,300 students is two parents. They may not be with the kid, but they're out there somewhere. They contributed to that child, and so that just exponentially grows the number. Lord, we pray for each one of those people in the midst of those situations, Lord. Ultimately, I want them to know Jesus. But Father, we want to care for them as human beings as well. Lord, would you put people like Irene in their path that can guide them to resources and opportunities that they can get a hand up in life, Lord.
Yes.
Would you allow those babies, those children, to be children? Would you give them enough stability in their life that they can focus on their own growth and their own development? Lord, would you help them to not fear where their next meal would come from, but would you put resources in their path? Lord, ultimately, we can't do anything but trust these students and their parents to your care. This is your world. Those are your people. You love them way more than we could. But Lord, would you open doors for them to walk through? Would you open doors for all of us to support? We're going to trust you for the outcome. Thank you for bringing Irene here today. Thank you for her service to these kids and their families. Bless her and bless her in her work. We love you and we trust you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Irene.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everybody.